to Secret Weapons, and today we're taking a look at Lossy, a collaboration between Bliss and Goodhertz. Alright, this is a really exciting one, and not just because it's pink, but I am stoked that it's pink. So Lossy is a plugin by the company Goodhertz, and it has enjoyed a relative amount of success and acclaim in the right circles of producers for an extended period of time now. But if you are somebody who is newer to knowing about it, but before today, you likely came to know about it because it was alleged to be the secret weapon behind the sound that is the Phoebe Bridgers records. It is alleged to be the kind of secret weapon of her producers to create that kind of beautiful, kind of distorted, broken lo-fi thing that her records are so effective at producing. And I'm actually going to link to a largely unrelated video in the description down below from the YouTuber who kind of unraveled the mystery of what plugin was being used on those Bridgers records. I highly recommend you watch that video. It will give you a lot of additional context on this in its original plugin form, as well as just some great thoughts on use cases for the sounds in this pedal or its predecessor, the plugin. But for the uninitiated, let's not harp too much on the original plugin version of this sound. We are here today to take a look at the collaboration between Goodhertz and Bliss, the Lossy pedal. And this is effectively a digital lo-fi pedal, but aiming to be digital lo-fi. Unlike something like the Gen Loss that is a digital pedal emulating the kind of worn degradation of tape machines, tape recorders, tape cassettes. This instead leans very hard into that kind of late 90s, early 2000s low resolution MP3 compression. This is something full of artifacts and digital aliasing and sizzle and kind of everything that you would have heard if the first time you ever heard Alien Ant Farm was a Kazaa download of a burned CD of a Kazaa download of a burned CD. And you may already be conjuring in your head some very specific sounds, clock noise issues, compression and aliasing in your head, and all of that is very much in here. All of that garbled junk that you would have heard in kind of the original year of YouTube made manifest in a plugin or a sound. And if you're about my age, mid-30s, you probably don't remember all those sounds too fondly. It's kind of a bygone era in a lot of ways of worse audio quality. But the beauty of this plugin and this pedal is the ability to take those things, harness them, recontextualize them, but also use a series of other controls on this device to create something beautiful out of that kind of digital broken mess. So let's talk about what this pedal is doing. In essence, you can think of Lossy as three main effect blocks. You have the loss itself, which is going to be the amount of loss and the speed at which the loss kind of happens. Loss can often be thought of in this pedal as depth or intensity of effect for this kind of signal degradation thing. And the speed is the rate at which the kind of degradation is being processed, as well as a handful of other speed-based things in this pedal. Beneath it, you have packets and mode. Mode is going to be a thing that switches between that kind of classic compressed MP3 sound, an inversion of that basically only plays the stuff cut out by that heavy amount of compression and degradation, or a really fascinating phase jitter mode that will do everything from dampening your pick attack in really weird, beautiful ways to creating almost smoke in your signal is the best way I can think to describe it. It is fizzy and jittery and broken and can be fine-tuned in ways that are really fascinating. To the left of that, you have the packet control itself, which offers clean packets, which is just your signal but degraded. A loss version, which is your signal with gaps in the audio where things have just gotten lost along the way, giving you everything from large absences of audio to stuttery fast jitters and drops. You also have my favorite of those three modes, the packet jitter mode, which will take pieces of your audio that you've just played and duplicate them on what you play next, basically shuffling around your audio, find and replacing from the last couple of seconds of playing or the last couple of milliseconds of playing, depending on, once again, how fast you have that speed set. Like I said, that speed is going to control a variety of things in this pedal. At the outset, that heavy signal degradation is going to be splattery and compressed and strange, which then is where we bring in our filter control. You have a filter, a frequency, and a slope that all work in tandem to create a very either specific or broad bandpass filter that will let you pull the junk away from your signal or accentuate it depending on what direction you want to go with these things. You can create beautiful, warm, mellow, lush, lo-fi, like dark textures, or go the exact opposite direction, create broken old radio signals, the feeling of losing access to your FM station as you drive down the 5. There are a lot of fascinating filter options in this thing. And even if you take the lost stuff out, it's a really good filter all on its own. And these things can be exaggerated or made subtle with the inclusion of a really beautiful, very, very splattery digital reverb in this thing as well. And that reverb by default is going to be at the front of the signal, giving you a wash that follows your guitar that will similarly be mangled, compressed, filtered, and cut apart. Or you can invert that, put it at the end of your signal chain, and create kind of a nice bed of ambience that kind of washes out a lot of the more jagged and surreal complications of using this pedal. The intense compression, limiting, and white noise that this thing creates at more extreme settings can be mitigated with the inclusion of a customizable gate control in this that can be accessed by pressing and holding your bypass control. Or this thing also has a freeze control that can be used to either save a moment in time and reprocess it through the plugin itself or the pedal itself, or altered to a slush state where audio is fed into that freeze, processed through at a rate determined by the speed control, and then emptied back out, leaving it on you to keep filling that kind of bucket in the pedal that will kind of process, freeze in place, and discard over time. The beauty of all of this is all of these things are pretty severe effects pretty quickly. The vibe of all this stuff gets very, very, very aggressive. And so in place of a traditional mix control, this thing instead has a global control where a mix would normally be. And we're going to harp on this a bunch as we get into our sound samples. It is very much not a mix control. It controls the intensity of all these effects, softening things, reintroducing an image or an interpretation of your dry signal into it without actually bringing the dry signal back. And that's worth clarifying because there is a dip switch up top that will give you access to a conventional wet-dry mix using that verb control if that's what you need instead. Being a Chase Bliss pedal, of course, there is MIDI in, stereo in and out, expression and CV controls, as well as your dip switches up top, giving you control over all the usual stuff like mono in, stereo out, your buffered bypass and trails, and all of your ramping parameters. But it also offers up additional controls, including that pre-post reverb thing, a slow dip switch that will actually make this thing sound and react much more closely to the original plugin, which is something that I really appreciate because I am a big fan of the original Goodhertz Lossy plugin. You can even do things like invert the filter using that band pass to actually be a band reject instead, using dip switches up top. And for you major stereo buffs out there, this of course runs in stereo in that same way that Chase Bliss's Mood and Gen Loss Mark II both did, but it also has that stereo spread option as well, which will do things like create a massive stereo field for the reverb in this thing, as well as a really fun and fascinating thing, which is taking those packet repeats and those packet loss moments and displacing them out into your left and right areas of your kind of like stereo spread, giving you something a little bit more gentle, but something that also kind of like echoes across your system as opposed to just happening in the center channel. Look, this is a lot of information to throw at you really quickly, but I wanted to kind of talk through the building blocks of this pedal because the way we just talked through it is largely going to be how we break it down in our sound samples right now. We're going to start with that loss section first. We're going to demystify every component of that and the hidden parameters underneath it. We are then going to move to that filter and then that reverb, and then get into some of the kind of like higher level customization and control. But like I said, this is one of those things that sounds strange on paper and at first blush is going to be angular and splattery and very strange, but subtlety is the name of the game here, in my opinion. This is something that will unlock very specific sounds that are not like the Gen Loss sounds or the isotope vinyl sounds or anything like that. This is its own thing in a really specific way. In that same way that you would look at a Blues Breaker, a Rats, and a Tube Screamer and not call them all the exact same effect. I don't think all lo-fi pedals are either made equal or made with the same intentions behind them. And Lossy brings something entirely fresh to my experience on the pedal board, and I'm really stoked about that. So let's get into it. As always, before we get into our sound samples, let's talk through our signal chain and the context we're working in. I am playing my Music Man St. Vincent Goldie into the 29 Pedals EUNA, the Bondi FX Squish As and Sick As, the Benson Germanium boost. From there we go to our Hologram Microcosm, which goes stereo out to the Universal Audio Del Verb delay and reverb, and the Universal Audio Dream, which is going to serve as our amplifier. From there we go in stereo to the Generation Loss and Goodhertz Lossy, and then out to our DAW, which is Universal Audio's Luna. We've got the Germanium boost on, the EUNA on, and our amplifier. This is what our dry tone sounds like. Before we get into any of the actual sounds of Lossy, let's go ahead and talk through really quickly how we are going to interact with the pedal as we go through things here. You have your kind of conventional, straightforward Chase, Bliss, and effect pedal in general style control scheme. You have your kind of base level effect controls with the knobs and switches. From there, you also have the ability to control secondary parameters, which are conveniently notated on the pedal in white text underneath the main parameters. And those are accessed by pressing and holding both foot switches at the same time, like so. When you see those lights light up green, you will be able to kind of like twist knobs or flip switches to access and fine-tune secondary parameters across the pedal. The right foot switch is going to be your bypass control, and it will light up red when you're in bypass mode when the pedal is active. And by pressing and holding, you can activate the gate in this pedal. On the left side, you have your freeze control, and that either exists in a hard state or a slushy state to let new audio in to refill the buffer. And that will also be denoted by a red or a green foot switch. Both of those foot switches can be changed from momentary to latching via a dip switch along the top of the pedal, as well as a variety of other controls that we will get into accessible via those dip switches as we roll through this device. When it comes to secondary parameters and everything, this pedal gets pretty deep pretty quickly. So if at any time you get lost with your Lossy, go ahead and take that preset switch, bottom center right here, and flip it back and forth to the left 3 times. It will arcade, the lights will arcade through, and it will kind of reset all of the parameters like so. And we've officially reset all of our hidden parameters back to factory default settings. And we'll kind of notate what is default as we roll through the device itself. Having done all that, we have our filter turned off, our reverb off, and our speed and our loss at noon. All toggles are in their most neutral positions, and our global is maxed out. This is what Lossy sounds like. As you can hear, that global will kind of reduce the severity of the effect pretty quickly, especially at kind of moderately severe loss settings. As you can hear, there's a lot of grime and grit and compressed kind of early 2000s nonsense in there. That kind of, like we've talked about, the emulation of a copy of a download of a burned CD, of a copy of a download of a burned CD. So that's the global control, and we'll revisit it as we walk through the various sections of this pedal. But that global can always be used to not just reduce the effects in this pedal, but very much soften them. So let's start with the kind of centerpiece of this device, the loss itself, the speed, the loss, and the two toggle switches beneath it that kind of fine-tune exactly what the speed and the loss are actually controlling. Because effectively, they can be thought of as a rate and depth control for this effect kind of at the center of the pedal. We're going to start by taking that loss control, start at noon, dial it back for a less kind of deep effect, a less loss effectively, if that makes sense. And then kind of turn it up, and then we'll do the same with the speed before getting into the rest of the loss controls themselves. Pay attention as I'm playing to the fact that playing dynamics will impact how this device reacts in very strong ways. You can hear right now there is white noise playing under my voice. That is just the pedal mangling audio passing through it. And even by doing things like pressing on my strings, you will hear its kind of timbre change. You can hear that compression kind of moving different pieces out of the way. So as I play, listen for those kind of dynamic changes as I dig in. And of course, this is another great example for that global control to really redeem something here. It's kind of how I tend to think of it is find something broken and insane, and then use that global control to really bring it back into the realm of usability. And conversely, the speed will control the speed of that loss, the way those artifacts kind of move. It will also control the kind of like emptying and refilling of that freeze control when you have it set as that kind of like the slushy freeze setting. And it will also control the length and the frequency of repeats and dropouts and jitters as we start to mess with some of those switches down below. But for now, let's just kind of hear how it, in this very stock standard loss mode, reacts. As you can hear right away, it's doing a lot at this minimum setting to smooth out those kind of like resonant frequency jump outs and stuff that are kind of being caused by my playing dynamics. Those heavier notes that would normally compress and mangle the signal really aggressively, those are being smoothed out very heavily by a really low speed. You can hear that it becomes jitterier, more almost caustic sounding as you bring it up. So those are the speed and the depth controls. So let's go ahead and take a look at those two toggle switches beneath your speed and your loss controls, starting with your 3 loss modes underneath the loss control itself, those 3 squares. You effectively have standard, which is going to be kind of like lossy data compression. It's that really crunchy, hyper compressed, like, you know, a low res MP3 rip of a burned CD, kind of sound we've been hearing so far. To the left, you have an inverse of that, which is basically going to be all of the audio that is being stripped away in that standard mode is the audio being used in that inverted mode on that left position. On that right position, you have a phase jitter, which is basically going to be tracking inaccuracies, phase issues that create something very sizzly and warbly. But as we will get to in a second, has one of my favorite things in this device, which is this really fascinating degradation of your pick attack, which, at least for guitar, creates something akin to a really broken, jacked up sounding like cello sound almost. It almost sounds like an aggressively bowed string instrument in a very fascinating way that we will get to in just a second. So as we've heard so far, this is standard mode. All that compression, all of that kind of like junk left in. And now this is all the stuff being removed from standard mode. I mean, there's so much being taken out that it almost sounds like a fake 12-string guitar, which is really fascinating. Fascinating consequences of really broken audio. It's like if somebody tried to download a banjo over the world's earliest internet connection. One of the fascinating things about this pedal is the way it reacts to the collection of frequencies you are giving it. That's why I like running at end of chain so much, is it really becomes a global vibe setter or destroyer, but also the same kind of like notes or chords played on a bridge position versus the neck position. Are fascinating in the way that they kind of like change their reaction. And this can be really cool if you feed a bunch of like wet effects into it. Let's go ahead and take our first real detour here. Turn on the microcosm and the Del Verb just to get really bizarre with this. Let's take the global down and then roll it up to kind of start creating a very broken version of lush ambience. And this is what I talk about it being at the end of the signal chain for a reason. There's something so beautiful about that. And we have not even gotten into the filter, which really does a lot to help you kind of take that garbled nonsense and craft it into something really intentional and beautiful. But even right there, we are already at something really special. And that's just the inversion mode. Let's go ahead and jump over to that phase jitter version. So invert, standard, and that phase jitter. So you're hearing right at the outset here, this kind of knobs at noon phase jitter thing. It is creating this really wide, flabby sounding thing in the hard left and right channels that is objectively not that pleasant and can be filtered out with that filter, but we're not there yet. What I want to do instead right now is to just showcase what I was talking about earlier with that kind of pick attack thing. So here's our normal pick attack. It almost sounds like a really fast auto swell, but without feeling like an auto swell. It is just a kind of like destruction of the pick attack itself in this really interesting way. I don't even know what we're doing right now. It's just cool. It's worth noting, we don't even have the reverb turned on right now. I haven't tested this yet, but let's go ahead and turn on that big, crazy microcosm Del Verb combo one more time and hear how this kind of influences that. I apologize in advance for when this video is 3 hours long because of these tangents. when we get into that filter, this is going to get real fun. And to round out the look at these three loss modes, let's jump between them as we're doing this ambient thing. And those are the three lossy modes. Let's take a look at that packet control, because we are still not out of this first block yet in terms of customizing just the stock standard parameters of the loss control itself. There's so much to unpack here. The final one is going to be the three different versions of packet loss in this device. You have the kind of clean version, which feels like a misnomer, but we're calling it the clean version, which basically means your guitar plays back basically unobstructed. And by that, I mean you are just hitting cleanly the loss filtering and modulation and garbling and everything. But to the left, you're going to have packet loss, which is basically going to be packets of information dropped, like a bad connection and everything. It's just going to be kind of like moments of silence in the audio. And to the right, you're going to have repeats, which is going to be moments where the idea that was just saved in the buffer is kind of repeated in replacing of new audio. So you're going to get kind of smears and stutters and that kind of thing that can be fine-tuned, both the loss kind of dropouts and those kind of smeared repeats and everything can be fine-tuned, of course, with those speed and loss controls. And when I say that they effectively were the speed and depth of the intensity of an effect, this is what we are building to here. You have them as kind of the straight up quality modulators, but now you have them as the straight up quality modulators, as well as the speed and depth of this dropout or kind of stuttery repeating blurring control. So this is loss. This is going to be the side that drops out audio. As you can see, the more loss, the more lost. I mean, I'm not being cute, that's what it is. and increasing in that stuttering as you turn that speed up. And once again, that mix control is not giving us back our dry signal. It's not blending dry back in. It's reducing the severity of what we have created. And that's wonderful because it can be these like massively broken moments, or you can kind of dial it way back for something that just creates momentary lapses, something a little bit more subtle, especially as you kind of fine tune the global with that loss control. Again, very useful with wet effects behind it, like that Del Verb. And on the other side, you have that packet repeat where it will kind of grab old information or kind of like very, very recent information and replace what you're currently playing with it in kind of like a cool stuttery, jittery kind of way. This will actually be useful because you can't see what I'm playing. I am just going to play just like that. Yeah, it's really, really cool, especially as you fine tune it into some really useful moments of kind of like, it almost feels like uncertainty sitting in your signal. Lower speeds are going to be larger pieces of audio being copied. Higher speeds are going to be shorter bursts of it. More of a stutter, an almost blurred thing rather than entire chunks of audio being circled back on itself. And again, this is really driving home that point that the global control is different than a mixed control, because we have now brought down the intensity of the loss component. Our guitar is sounding much more normal again, but we are not losing out on that kind of like lost information being repeated back on itself. We're not blending our dry guitar back in with those repeated moments. We are still getting them, just less severely, but in a way that kind of creates a great balancing act. Resetting back to something more traditional in terms of the kind of like loss mode sound here. There are 3 more things we can use to fine tune and kind of sculpt our kind of bass loss sound. And they are the hidden controls along the bottom 3 knobs, being auto gain, threshold, and loss gain. The auto gain is going to kind of help mitigate perceived volume losses. It'll kind of try to like level out all of our kind of like high and low points of audio, kind of regardless of how speed and loss are set. As you've heard, we get a lot of kind of like really peaky highs and sudden drops of lows. You can smooth that out by increasing the severity of the auto gain sound. You also have a limiter underneath the frequency for threshold, and that's going to apply an overall limiter to the sound to create a maximum amount of kind of volume output, obviously. And then your loss gain is going to be a post limiter gain that will let you kind of like re-bring in that lost volume from that threshold. So let's kind of check out that auto gain. And then if you want a really compressed sounding thing, you can set that threshold way, way more sensitive for your limiter. As you can hear, we brought that threshold way down. That limiter is really like smashing it now. And so we're not going to set it that severe. We'll bring it up a little bit, but then we'll use that auto gain to bring some of that volume back. And these three settings are they're largely set and forget. Kind of get them where you want them to be so that you feel like your loss is reacting smoothly. You're not going to like override your like preamp for your recording interface. You're not going to blow up your amp or anything like that. And you can mostly leave it alone from there. I'm resetting mine to factory default. And that is the loss control. So let's now go into our filter control. We've minimized out our loss section for now so that we have a dry guitar that we can use to kind of get to know the filter a little bit before showcasing how it's there to really fine tune, accentuate, and soften up or completely mangle whatever loss settings you are leaning into. The filter at its core is a bandpass filter. Very straightforward. You set your kind of width of your filter using the filter control itself. You set the center point of your frequency range using the frequency control. Anywhere from something that almost sounds low passy if you really minimize it to something that sounds high passy at the top. You've got a slope control underneath at 3 positions, a kind of gentle tone knob style filter at 6 dB of slope, a 24 and a 96 dB, which is going to be very resonant, very like almost synthy sounding intensity of the slope on the filter. It is worth noting, like with everything in this pedal, that global control is going to play a major role in fine-tuning the filter to your taste. And at the end of this section, we will get into one of our dip switches, which is an inversion control, which will actually use the slope and all of the controls of this filter and convert it from a band pass to a band rejection filter, basically allowing you to pick frequencies that you want to reduce or eliminate from your signal rather than the frequencies you want to keep. This is not one where we're going to kind of look at every single control by itself. We're going to start kind of playing with the frequency and the filter together and then take a look at those slope and global controls. The filter control is going to effectively start at its widest possible position, filtering the least audio out. And as you increase that filter control, it's going to kind of hone in on the specific frequencies that it wants to accentuate. So let's give like a nice big E minor and then kind of turn that up and listen to it kind of focus in on frequencies that can then be fine-tuned using that frequency range. As you can hear, that frequency control is doing almost nothing right now because the filter is basically not filtering out. And that slope down below will go a long way in fixating and focusing and accentuating that filter. Like I said, this is going to be the most severe version of it, but that's also because we have the most narrow frequency range being selected right now with that filter. And like with everything, that global control softens all of it back up. just as a filter, it's really, really good. Like, you could take that, apply that limiter back in and get some of that auto gain going and create something great right off the bat. But of course, the real strength here is using that to hone in, fine tune, and perfect your loss setting. So let's go back to that loss mode, the filter off, dial up something kind of broken sounding, and then find something good inside of it. And again, here is a great example of why that filter is so valuable. Remember all that low-end crap we were getting from that jitter mode? All that like low-end compression stuff. You can really go a long way in filtering in and out all the stuff you want or don't want. And we're going back to that ambient thing. And let's go ahead and invert that filter using the dip switch up top to showcase how we can use this instead to find and remove frequencies. This will obviously come up when we start ramping later. So those are the fundamentals of that filter control. Let's take a look now at our reverb control. The reverb basically has three main parameters. You have verb mix, which is basically just the reverb control. You have verb decay, which is going to be the hidden function on that reverb control. And then you have the reverb location, which is going to be a dip switch control. So by default, the reverb exists in front of the loss control itself, feeding into the loss and everything that comes with it, including those dropouts and all that. So basically it is there to heavily accentuate those repeating moments, those dropouts, all of that brokenness. But you can also put it after the loss controls themselves, giving you a slightly cleaner reverb and something that will kind of blur the lines of those broken moments rather than calling additional attention to them. For the record, when I say clean reverb, I mean clean for this, which is a very intentionally early 90s sounding compressed artificial digital reverb. So we are back to a very dry guitar tone. With less compression. And let's give that reverb control a listen. And of course, it is worth noting that it is, in fact, a stereo reverb, like all of these kind of modern era Chase Bliss digital effects are. So let's take the reverb out of the Delmar, but let's bring in a little bit of that delay really quickly, just to hear kind of that kind of moving delay and how it follows the reverb. So yeah, by default, it is actually a pretty beautiful little reverb. And let's go ahead and play with both that mix control and the decay. It, of course, can go full wet. And it's got a pretty good decay to it by default. Can get very, very short and snappy. It sounds very much like a kind of like an early 90s tile reverb plugin. But of course, stretches out into massive soundscapes. Decay at noon. You can hear quick early reflection buildups and then long trails after that. Kind of an initial slapback reverb sound and then a decay trail. And obviously all those things get more accentuated as you turn them up. And maximum. Let's go full wet maximum. But like we said, this isn't just here to be a reverb, it is here to create additional movement and accentuation of that loss control. And as discussed, when you have that that packet loss mode turned on, Like I said, it does a lot to soften things up. But if you wanted to do the inverse of this and you wanted to create a little bit more of a smoother effect, say you switch over to something like that packet repeat system. And you want that to kind of smooth out a little bit, we can actually move our reverb behind all of this stuff and create something a lot softer. As you can hear, all of that garbling is now going into the front of the reverb. Or the reverb back into the front of it. Okay, so let's take a look at our freeze control and the latching dip switch. I am of the opinion that turning that latching dip switch on at the outset is really, really useful for one main reason, and that is I am tabletop recording right now, so like I'm using my hands to do all of my pedal adjustments and not my feet. And the freeze in the kind of like standard state will go to what is called slush mode. And you basically have a hard mode and a slush mode for the freeze. Slush is going to be old audio kind of empties out of the buffer and you refill it with new audio to be processed through. And hard mode is going to keep what you have in there frozen in place, processing through the device. You can switch between them using kind of like pressing and holding to kind of latch onto moments in the Lossy. But by setting it to that latching mode, it is easier to tap the freeze to open it up in slushy mode or press and hold to go to green. And then in either state, you can press and hold to switch to the other one until you press it again. For example, a soft press or a fast press opens up our slush mode, which will let new audio in, and which will then phase back out. And the rate it phases out is determined by that speed control. And then by switching to green, what's in there already is staying in there. And I can switch back to red mode by pressing and holding again. And in either state, you can tap it once to turn freeze back off, which is just a mode I like more than the alternative, which is having to hold the button down when you want to be in specific save states of your freeze. You also have a hidden parameter for this, which is going to be the freeze and live mix in that global secondary control up top. So by maxing that out, once we initiate that freeze, new audio is not allowed in over top of it. But even by going over to that freeze, we can still now add new information in to be saved. And as we've discussed, higher speeds are going to be the faster that empties back out. Or we can use that, that secondary parameter to allow our dry tone, or our quote-unquote dry tone, to continue to work its way over top of the frozen state of the pedal. So now the frozen stuff and the new stuff is all being processed through the engine in parallel. And that is how you use the freeze control. I would recommend, if you are in slushy state, using the full wet thing is a really interesting way of feeding new stuff into the buffer in creative ways. But if you are a bigger fan of that kind of like freeze something in place as a broken bed to play over, I think that kind of fine-tuning the balance with that global secondary control is high value. Let's take a look at our gate now. Similar to the freeze control, the gate by default is going to be a press and hold momentary switch. So if we disengage that latching dip switch, it will turn on only while we're holding it, which can be cool for kind of intentional stutters and momentary stuff. But once again, both for desktop use and because I'm a bigger fan of latching stuff, we're going to activate that latching control because I think both of these things are made better by latching. So now you'll notice we do not have all of that white noise just existing in the background. No matter how severe we want to make it. Like normally we should be hearing that, just pure white noise. But we can cut it out until we play. So what you're hearing there is the threshold for opening that gate set pretty high right now. Not a lot is getting let through. So let's use our secondary control under that filter to set a lower gate threshold. You could do something like minimize it so that white noise is still getting through, or you could set it just high enough that that stuff goes away until you play. And what's fascinating about it is because things are so glitchy and stuttery in this pedal, you get this kind of sense that things are kind of losing connection with this gate. It is not a traditional noise gate in the way that would be conventionally useful. It is instead better for broken connections and kind of momentary failures of playing. Fascinating, weird thing that can be used semi-practically in this pedal or in completely bizarre ways. And finally, there are a few additional ways you can fine-tune your experience with Lossy. Some additional controls, dip switches, and stuff that can really make this thing really kind of flexible and useful in a lot of very fun ways. The first one we're going to look at is, of course, the stereo width option. You have kind of true stereo by default, but you also have access to a version that kind of sums the incoming signal in the wet channel to mono and then creates a stereo image out of it. Doing things like dispersing your packet loss stuff on the left and right channels and progressively widening the reverb as you turn it up. So let's start with that reverb and then bring in some of that packet stuff to kind of listen to the difference between standard configuration and stereo spread mode. also have what is called slow mode, which introduces a little bit more latency, but kind of beefs up a lot of the pedal and darkens it up a little bit, which effectively is bringing it more in line with the original sound of the Goodhertz Lossy plugin. So if you are somebody who has used the Lossy plugin a bunch and that's the sound you are trying to chase down, this is going to be a useful piece of unlocking that sound. I'm a big fan of slow mode. I usually leave it on this pedal, to be honest. I think it also is worth taking that off for a second because that slow mode does introduce a lot of kind of sluggishness to parts of the pedal. Nothing that's going to kind of ruin anything for you, but something that definitely gives added weight to that kind of like broken violin viola sound I was talking about earlier. Yeah, it's a nice little thing that I like. Having the original kind of true to form sound of Lossy is quite nice in this pedal, and I am a fan. And there is one final thing that I want to touch on, which is we talked a little bit earlier about this idea that the pickup selection in this pedal or in your guitar does go a long way in seeing what gets accentuated and pushed to the forefront and buried down in Lossy, especially in that kind of center original loss mode. Bridge. Neck. The timbre gets very, very different, especially if you pull that filter back out. And the ability to change the weight of the pedal is actually something that's really nice to have included in here. The secondary control on your mode is going to have kind of the different weights of the EQ on this pedal. And basically we are in the center mode right now, which is going to be a neutral response, a nice flat response across all of your kind of frequencies. But by going left or right, you can actually introduce like a psychoacoustic model for the different Lossy modes that will let you favor to the left darker frequencies or to the right brighter frequencies. So as you can hear, we are now grabbing higher frequencies and bringing them to the forefront when that compression hits. And we are now grabbing the lower frequencies first. Okay, let's go ahead and take everything we've put together so far, because this is a lot of disparate pieces in a pedal that kind of all on their own are something, but when you really marry them together well, become something really, really valuable. And so let's go ahead and start dialing up some really cool, useful sounds in this thing. We'll use things like the microcosm and the Del Verb out in front, and then we'll also do some stuff with ramping. We can do things like ramp the frequency to kind of move through focused frequencies as we play, or even ramp something like the speed of that loss control. As you can hear, we have set things up so that we are now ramping through our frequency controls. And because we are ramping upwards to higher frequencies in that filtering range, what I want to go ahead and do is now change the weighting of the pedal to favor lower frequencies first. As an act of counterbalancing where we are going frequency-wise. And if we really want to have fun with it, let's turn that spread back on. We are now ramping both the filter and the frequency. So as it gets higher, it gets narrower, and as it drops back down, it gets wider again. And now we're sweeping the opposite direction.